Next up, we have Edström's keynote from Research Institute of Sweden. Thank you.
Good to be here. My name is Edström, and I will try to share my screen now with you to see how that will work. That's always an interesting thing to do. Yes, perfect. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for having me at your summer lesson. I'll introduce myself very briefly. I work for RISE, Research Institute of Sweden. I'm an engineer from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. I have worked for 20 years as a technology and business journalist in Sweden and the United States. I've co-founded 3 companies. I've been at RISE since 2014, and my main work is to support small and medium-sized companies in their innovation and internationalization activities. But I also write some industry reports, and one of the reports I wrote together with my colleague Sofia Målberg last year was about 5G. It was called Accelerating 5G in the Nordic and Baltic region, Stepping Stones for a Cross-Border Collaboration. And this was published. This is published at the Nordic Council of Ministers homepage. So I've been invited here today to talk a little bit about the findings in that report, and also to take some questions. I hope to be able to speak for about 30 minutes, and we'll be happy to take any questions afterwards. And a little bit of background. This might be, you might already know this, but in May 2018, all the prime ministers of the Nordic countries signed a letter of intent. And they had this ambition to make the Nordic area the first and most integrated 5G region in the world, which is quite a strong statement. However, it didn't really happen that way. And one of the reasons, or one of the consequences, was that in March last year, about a year ago, the Nordic Council of Ministers wanted to map the ongoing 5G test activities in the Nordic and Baltic areas. So they had enlarged the area to also include the Baltic countries. To see what is going on in 5G testing. Where are the collaborations? Where are the new business cases? And they commissioned RISE to do this mapping. And in June last year, about a year ago, we released our report based on lots of interviews and lots of secondary research, giving a baseline study on the 5G situation in the region. So the findings at this point in time are about 1 year old. Some things have changed, but not everything. And as we are painfully aware, we have also had this corona situation that has changed the landscape a little bit. We also organized a roundtable conference in Stockholm, or rather the Nordic Council of Ministers organized that roundtable in collaboration with us. And the aim was to accelerate the development of the 5G and accelerating also the collaboration within 5G. And later in November in Riga at the Techretory Conference, we put some of our findings in a discussion paper where the relevant ministers from the various Nordic countries had a discussion based on that report. So it seems like we did some impact. And these are some pictures from the roundtable. It was some of the organizations, or all of the organizations that participated. It was an interesting experience because we had invited 28 people, I believe, and by name, and all of them turned up. This was, of course, pre-corona, but I've never experienced something like that you invite 28 really important people and they all show up. So that obviously means that that there is an interest in the subject matter. So what did we find out? First of all, that there is a huge interest, which might not be a surprise now, but definitely was, the interest was even larger than we anticipated in last year. And we found that there are more than 50 test beds or test sites for 5G or 4G preparing for 5G. What was not so surprising was finding that Finland was the most advanced 5G nation in the region. But the number of test beds is slightly larger in Sweden, mainly because Sweden doesn't have or didn't have a proper 5G network or a regular commercial 5G network at the time. Finland, of course, introduced 5G on a commercial scale much earlier. When it comes to the test activities, they were dominated by manufacturing industries and transport industry, but we could have found examples in a lot of other verticals as well. What we didn't find was transnational 5G collaboration. Of course, the Nordic Council of Ministers would have hoped that there was transnational collaboration, but we found very little of that. Most stakeholders regarded 5G as a local interest or a national interest or maybe a European interest with that should be treated on the EU level. But as for Nordic collaboration, there was very little. Also not too surprising was that the 5G will be adopted gradually and it will take several years, so many years for 5G to cover the entire area. We also found a lot of interest and talk about new business models and business cases. But as for in June last year, we had not seen too much of that, maybe because 5G hadn't really happened for real, not in the industrial sense. And anyone who studies 5G will come up with some fascinating numbers. I am not sure that these forecasts are accurate anymore. They are probably slightly higher, if anything. But I think it's fair to say that 5G will dominate the discussion about the mobile communication for the next couple of years. And this is a virtual tsunami happening on the mobile world. What is interesting here, I think, is the last bullet point, that no nation or region has taken any 5G lead in any vertical. There is no nation or region or place that has said that we will dominate or we will take the lead in manufacturing industry, or we will take the lead in 5G for agriculture, or we will take the lead for 5G in transportation. So far, most 5G activities seem to aim at reaching coverage of regular subscribers and not so much specializing on the verticals. So there are opportunities. It is also obvious in our findings that the driving forces in the Nordic region vary a lot. In Finland, we have public organizations, Traficom Business Finland, Ministry of Transport and Communication, and others who have taken a very proactive role. And they have pushed 5G in collaboration with other stakeholders, industrial stakeholders and academic stakeholders. We have not seen that kind of push from public organizations in any other Nordic country. We could contrast that to the Swedish situation, where manufacturing and transportation industries dominate the 5G landscape. There are, of course, initiatives from municipalities, from universities, from other stakeholders, but the most advanced test sites, at least up until the fall, they were initiated by industrial companies. In Norway and Denmark, things were a little bit different. The operators were pushing the developments, and in the Baltic countries, a similar situation as well, where complemented by academia, some of the universities in the Baltic countries were really pushing the development as well. And of course, this conference, 5G Territory in Riga, is also a driving force. And we didn't identify any Nordic Baltic driving force at all, in spite of the ministerial letter of intent. So there has to be more than writing a letter of intent for collaboration to happen on a high level. As I said, we found at least 50 test beds in the Nordic and Baltic countries. We were sort of generous and included also 4G test beds preparing for 5G. I believe we found many test beds, but of course, I don't think our list was complete, but we found some test beds in various places, even in Åland and in Svalbard. So the situation was quite diverse. Finland also here was dominating with the national test works with some 50 projects at the time. And some of these projects could be regarded as test beds in their own right. What we also found was that there were test beds for most verticals, even though, as said, also manufacturing industries and transportation dominate. In those days, there were one of the challenges was that there were not very many terminals available at all on the market. So that definitely hampered the test activities. Now, of course, that situation has changed a little bit. We made a SWOT analysis of the region, trying to figure out what are the strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and threats. And I think it's worth pointing out that among the strengths is, of course, the LOI from the prime ministers, and also the many test beds. And of course, the strong telecom industry in the Nordic, dominated by Ericsson and Nokia, but they are not alone. There are a lot of other small and medium and size enterprises. And we have a history of IT leadership and digitalization, not only in Sweden and Finland, but also in some of the other Nordic countries, Denmark not least. Among the weaknesses, we found that one of the most important weaknesses was that it was very difficult to identify the new business models. And that is partially, we believe, due to the fact that no killer application was identified at that point in time. Later on, we believe that there are some killer applications in the within the manufacturing industry, or maybe not killer applications, but at least applications that could be very important and could dominate this area. We also found that there were not very intermediaries developing new 5G services, and I'll talk a little bit more about that eventually. And of course, there are opportunities. There is an opportunity for leadership within manufacturing industries. And we also believe that agriculture could be a contender for global leadership when it comes to 5G applications. Among the threats, of course, is the fact that many other countries are rolling out 5G much faster than we are in Europe in general, and not least the Nordic countries. Many countries invest much more money in R&D than we do in this part of the world. And there is very little coordination between government and public authorities, with Finland being the exception here. In Sweden, this has been a great challenge to the 5G development, where the government has not been nearly as proactive as in Finland. So we made some suggestions and recommendations in this report as well. And one of the suggestions was to evaluate the possibilities of a pan-Nordic Baltic spectrum license. Our firm belief is that the Nordic countries and also the Baltic countries by themselves are a little bit on the small side to create the economy of scale that would be necessary for operators and vendors. But that's not the only reason. It would also simplify the transnational business for large corporates, whereas it would make it easier if you had factories in different countries, for instance, if you had one license. It's not a showstopper, but it would definitely help. We would also recommend to consider the opportunities for new stakeholders to license spectrum, not only the traditional telecom operators. This is something that is done in, for instance, Germany and many other countries. We believe that this would allow a more dynamic business environment, and thus we would see much more innovation in the space. We would also like to see some deregulated experimental zones for 5G innovation. That is something that has been tried in other cases with some success, and we believe that 5G would be no exception there. If a deregulated experimental zone was created around, for instance, a university or around a factory, we would see a lot more experimentation and most likely see more innovation as well. When it comes to softer things, we would recommend, at least from the Nordic Council point of view, that the Nordic and Baltic voice was more common in the European Union. And we would encourage Nordic-Baltic applications for EU funding for 5G projects. We have seen very little of that. Most applications for 5G projects within EU are either pan-European or from individual nations, but not very many. We haven't seen any Swedish-Finnish, or we haven't seen any Swedish-Danish or Danish-Baltic or what have you. And if the Nordic ministers are serious about creating a Nordic-Baltic 5G leadership, then they should also allocate some money there. And that we haven't seen. Innovation tend to cost money, and if we want leadership, we need innovation, and thus we need some funding. We have not seen any response to this recommendation so far, unfortunately. So why should we care? What is this? I mean, so far I've talked a little bit about the findings in our reports, but I'd like to expand that a little bit to talk about why should we care? What is this thing about 5G? And since you are in this summer school or taking summer classes on 5G, you're probably well aware of all these factors. But I still think it's worth underlining some of them a little more. 5G has the opportunity to give new ways of thinking and new ways of working. It's definitely technologically new ways to connect, and we can see a lot of new ways to collaborate. So there are a lot of opportunities. And many industries need some kind of, they need to kickstart their 5G deployment. And we have seen examples of that in Testbeds, but we haven't seen it on any broader scale yet. And to use a Swedish phrase, there is a smorgasbord of opportunities in 5G with enhanced mobile broadband, of course, massive machine-to-machine communication, and of course the ultra-reliable low latency, which is a fascinating technology that has yet to manifest itself in terms of business opportunities and business cases. It is important, I think, to also stress the fact that 5G is not a revolution. It is an evolution. It's a natural next step in the digitalization of industrial activities, along with the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and what some people call distributed ledger technology, other people call blockchain. But it is a natural development of things. And the business cases we have seen so far are mostly internal in the industry. They usually deal with higher efficiency, more automation, higher productivity. And it's in the next step where we will see new services, where we believe that predictive maintenance and also better customer intelligence are very high on that list. And why should the manufacturers care about this? And that's the reason is very simple. I mean, there are about 4 million base stations in the world, but there are 10 million factories and 3 million warehouses. So if each of these factories and should if a base station should be deployed in each factory and or in each warehouse, that would in itself triple the market for that is already quite large. So we believe that 5G in industry is a huge business case for telecom manufacturers and for operators. But this, we believe the industry is, the telecom industry is getting there. It's not quite ready yet, but it's getting there. This is an interesting comparison, I believe, where industrial 5G is basically what 3G and 4G was for individuals. 3G was, as we all know, the foundation for mobile internet, but it wasn't very good. 3G was okay. It opened the doors to mobile internet, but it didn't become really good until 4G came along. And as stated, industrial 5G has many advantages. There is, of course, the bandwidth, the latency, and the capacity, and the opportunity to do network slicing. More functions will be available as the standardization evaluates, or as the standardization is coming along. Some hardware costs are still quite high, but will go down. So 5G is a revolution of the same magnitude as cloud is something that Andreas Christensen from Telenor stated. I would say that yes, it is a revolution, but it might not become really good until 6G comes along. But then, of course, that's not a reason to wait, because there are some obstacles. Industrial 5G faces a lot of obstacles, which is natural with new technology. And one of the most obvious obstacles is there is a lack of competence and knowledge. It is a new technology, and it has new demands. The manufacturers, Ericsson and Nokia's of the world, they are working on more out-of-the-box solutions that would make it much easier to deploy 5G in an industrial setting, but they still have some way to go. And also the ecosystem is not very mature. So far, most telecom companies, they sell their equipment to operators, and the operators basically sell spectrum access. And who will develop the industry-specific services? We have seen some examples. We have seen some consultant companies. We have seen some startups with good ideas, but they haven't really reached any scale yet. So, but I believe, and we believe that there is an ecosystem waiting to happen here. There is, of course, a cost obstacle. 5G is complex, and if 5G is portrayed as an alternative to Wi-Fi or other traditional networks in an industrial setting, it might not be that easy to find the business case that makes sense. But given the advantages of 5G, I'm quite sure that there will be good business cases for initially, as I said, for making the industry more efficient, and in the next step for more together with artificial intelligence for better customer for better customer intelligence or for better customer experiences. And then, of course, one obstacle is the operation. Setting up a 5G network can be done. If you're really good, you can do it without operator support. But if you get operator support, it's, of course, much easier. Who should operate this? Could be an operator, could be yourself, but it's still quite a challenge. So, yes, there are obstacles. And what does Corona has to do with all this? There is, in my opinion, reason to be optimistic here, because as far as we can see, the 5G rollout has not been that badly hit by the Corona pandemic. We see good growth numbers from Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei. That obviously means that a lot of base stations are being deployed in the world, and 5G is where they now start to earn money. We have seen no slowdown in standardization. We have seen that that is ongoing. And if you look with optimistic glasses on this development, the fact that Corona has put a lot of industrial activities on pause, that could actually be an opportunity to invest in 5G competence and to develop use cases. And we have seen that happen in some industries. And I'm personally quite quite convinced that post-Corona, those industries who have invested in 5G in one way or another will have a competitive advantage. There are, of course, some other opportunities with the 5G that could be investigated. I think one of the most important here is the bottom bullet here. Or it's not really a bullet, but the bottom statement here. To have policymakers on cross-sectorial research. We should have more regulatory bodies collaborate across the countries and figure out where are the major obstacles, where are the anomalies, and how could cross-border or cross-domain regulatory anomalies be taken out of the equation. That would help development a lot, and that is something that could definitely be done during the Corona pandemic, regardless of that. As with all major changes, time is of essence. We believe that opportunities that the 5G rollouts are that are offered by the 5G rollouts, they will be harnessed by new entrepreneurs and existing businesses as well. And if there are no Nordic Baltic initiatives and incentives, they could be political, they could be financial, technical. The necessary alliances for leadership will be found elsewhere where such incentives can be found. Follow the money is of course valid here as well. And that is basically my statement. So thank you very much. I would very much appreciate any questions or comments or feedback. And I will now exit the sharing route. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'm sorry, I can't hear anything. If anyone is talking, I can't hear that. I hope you heard what I said. I see some comments in the chat. Okay, glad to hear that you heard me. What I think is the most promising area of cooperation depends a little bit on where you're looking, but I think that industrial cooperation would be definitely very high on that list. Manufacturing companies in different domains or different countries can learn a lot from each other, since there are a lot of test activities going on right now. Some of the companies are opening up their experiences. And I believe that studying those experiences and comparing them could take the cooperation to the next level. As for 5G job market, I mean, the usual suspects are still hiring. Ericsson is hiring in Sweden, at least. I don't know how Nokia is doing at this point in time, but there are definitely some openings. Emerging jobs should also happen in the consultant business. Large consultant companies like Tieto and others, they definitely have openings in the 5G arena, where they are some of the contenders for developing these new services that I mentioned that will be necessary for the next implementation, next wave of implementation of new businesses. So that could be one area where it might be worth looking for a job. Also, of course, the operators are definitely will definitely need new competence. I would also like to address the agriculture sector here, because the agriculture and the agriculture business is a business that would benefit a lot from more 5G coverage. It might not happen until might not happen right now, might not happen this year, but I believe it will happen in not too short time, since some of the opportunities of making agriculture more efficient can actually be done with 5G in a very cost-efficient way. I got a question here if the Asia Pacific 5G deployment is included in the report, and only briefly. The report was focusing on the development in the Nordic and Baltic countries, so we only mentioned some of the 5G deployment plans very briefly in our report as a point of reference. That was not a focus area. So here's another question. What do I think about the initiative of Nordic Baltic global project-based 5G minor studies boosting learning application of 5G technology in business and other organizations? I think I'm not aware of the details in this project, but or this initiative, but it sounds like a very promising idea. It will be, at least initially, a business case by business case deployment in the industry. And if, as I said, lack of knowledge or lack of competence is one of the major obstacles for 5G to happen in the industrial space, then if you do these minor studies, you would probably have a very good opportunity to apply that knowledge in the real world in the very near future. Yes, of course, I understand that the top 5G providers should support it. I believe they would, and I also believe that the general industry would support it. I know that some Swedish companies like ABB, like Boliden, like Volvo, Scania, and others, they are very actively pursuing their 5G experiments. And for instance, Scania, the big truck manufacturer outside Stockholm, they have two private 5G networks, one for their manufacturing activities and also one for their test track for their trucks. So they definitely need more 5G competence, and that's just one company, albeit a big one. Okay, more questions? If there's need for continuing study, what would it be? That is a good question. I think it would be fair to one idea. This is just from top of my head, and one idea could be to compare some of the existing industrial business cases. Yes, to compare some of the existing business cases in some of the industries. There are examples in the report that we published, and I'm quite sure that there are other examples as well. I know that in Finland, Traficom has a list of different examples as well. So comparing those business cases or use cases and see if there's anything that they can learn from each other or that can be learned from the comparison might be a good start. So the next question here is, if I can elaborate a bit deeper on the experimental test beds I mentioned. Yes, I mean, they come in so many different shapes and so for so many different purposes that it's some of them are for commercial activities like manufacturing industries or for harbors. They deal with the for instance, self-driving or autonomous vehicles. How can 5G interact with autonomous vehicles in a closed environment? We've had one experimental test bed in Sweden in a mine where 5G was replacing some of the other networks there. So all the mining equipment was controlled over 5G with some very good results. One of the major findings from that particular test bed is that the uptime in itself was the most important factor. They had previously been using Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi was not really dependable. Wi-Fi didn't have uptime of 99.99999% of the time, whereas 5G had showed very good numbers in that respect. They had almost 100% uptime. 5G momentum, yes, that is indeed. Oh, hello, Mario. That is a very good link that Mario has published here in the group chat. Yes, and I'm happy to see that Trafficom is continuing its work to promote 5G trials, because I believe that there are a lot of opportunities that we have only begun scratching the opportunities here. So very much more can be done. Whether the study describing the best practices and use cases would speed up the application of 5G globally. Yes, I believe that best practices are always important to highlight, and whether or not it would speed up the applications globally remains to be seen, of course, but because that depends on what best practices you choose to describe. But I still think there is an opportunity to take on a leadership position when it comes to industrial 5G applications. Right now, 5G is used mainly to boost the bandwidth of basically everyone, of all citizens in the various countries, and but we have not seen yet someone taking the leadership in various vertical application areas such as manufacturing industries. So if the best practices were described in a good way in a well-chosen vertical, that would probably speed up the application globally, yes. We do follow the 5G development at RISE, and we talk to the Nordic Council of Ministers to see they have some interest. The further studies will most probably be focused more on services and implementations of 5G, and not so much on the testbed sides. Personally, I believe it would be really interesting to see now, 1 year or 1.5 years later, what has happened, what is the situation now, what trends can we see? Because what we did last year was more of a baseline study, and it would be great to follow up with a new study to see where has the development taken place? Is there any, or what progress has been made? Where has that progress been made? Can we see any Nordic collaboration now that we couldn't see, or Nordic Baltic collaboration now that we couldn't see last year? It's of course always a matter of funding. If the Nordic Council Minister would fund such a study, we would be happy to do that, to make that study. Okay. So I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much. If there's interest, I will send my slides to Jari, and maybe Jari can distribute them to whoever's interested. It's open information, and of course the report is available on the Nordic Council of Ministers homepage on the link that is in the that can be found in the slides. So thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Good luck with your 5G studies. Oh, from Melbourne. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Adam, for your keynote. Next up, at 1 o'clock, we have the next lecture. See you soon.